Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 139 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. I'm back down here in the vomitorium. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Dr. David Noe. How you feeling, Dave?
I'm doing really well, thanks. I have recovered from some sleep deprivation that I endured.
Okay, you want to say a little bit about that? Or?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I was traveling in weeks past to California, doing a little bit of teaching at a seminary down there on one of my favorite topics, Theodore Beza, and the trip back was of epic proportions.
Yes.
I love it when something mildly bad happens so that you can, milk it for sympathy and comedy.
Yeah.
But I don't like it when anything really bad happens, obviously.
And so this was something that was this really bad?
No.
Okay.
It was of minor proportions.
Okay, gotcha.
So last night I was talking to a friend, and the person said, "So I, how was your trip back?" I said, "Well, I was in Pittsburgh." And they said, "Pittsburgh? What were you doing in Pittsburgh?" I said, "Because Pittsburgh is the easiest way to get to Baltimore so that I can get to Grand Rapids," which is precisely what happened.
Oh, man.
So Tuesday, I'm in San Diego.
Yep.
And Wednesday morning, I'm in Baltimore, all in the, purpose.
Coast to coast.
That's right, of getting to Grand Rapids. It's quite a continent. I've flown over it.
You have,
so,
right. Yeah. Oh, man. So, I imagine that was a lot of uncomfortable cramming yourself into uncomfortable places, trying to get some sleep.
That's right.
Yeah.
Eating airport food. Right.
Yeah.
Have you been to Midway Airport?
I have.
Yes. Why do they have so many non-franchise, non-chain, non-brand restaurants in that place?
It's been a while since I've been there, but they really, it's just kind of.
Well, see, I like eating local, you might say.
Yeah.
When you have a chance to figure out the nuances and so forth of the good restaurant from the bad restaurant.
Right.
So, for example, locally we have Le Kebab.
Yes.
Great place to eat.
I love that place.
Real food, the breakfast place.
Another good one.
These are not chains. These are fantastic eateries.
Right.
But when I'm traveling in a strange place, I know what I'm going to get from, say, Burger King or one of those other kinds of fast food places.
Yep.
But Midway, they had strange restaurants like Brendy's and McDonald's.
Did you take a chance?
I went to something called M Burger.
And how was it?
It was okay.
All right. Okay, yeah.
But why do places do this?
I don't know. I remember the last time at Midway, I was at Midway. It took me a long time to figure out that, this is not a bus station.
Exactly. Right? It's just a little bit larger than a bus station. It doesn't seem large enough to be an actual airport.
I know. That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's unnerving.
Everything is suspect, down to the cuisine.
And the worst part of it was the whole time I'm thinking, this is liminal. This is liminal.
Oh, really?
Because once you told me airports are liminal,
they are liminal.
I was stuck.
You're stuck, right? Yeah. It's always a place of great anxiety for many, many people.
Yeah. And I did a lot of driving of a rental car while I was on this trip.
Oh, yeah?
Starting out in the San Diego area, then driving up to Los Angeles. And visited some friends, Tony and Mindy. Got some fantastic hospitality from them.
Excellent.
I got to visit the Huntington Gardens and Library.
Yeah.
I'd never been there. I got to see the Norton Simon Museum. And on Monday, I went to the Getty Villa.
Yes, you sent me that wonderful picture about that tablet of instructions on how to get to the underworld.
That's right.
That was fantastic. I loved that.
Don't take a wrong turn at Albuquerque. But as I'm driving this vehicle, right? It has one of those backup cameras, so you don't run into anything. And then it broke, but thankfully there was a backup to the backup camera.
There was an auxiliary backup camera?
No.
Oh, no?
No, it's just a stupid pun.
Oh, I see. I wasn't following. I was actually thinking. I was excited.
I appreciate that. I know what you're saying. Stupid puns, that's a reversal for you. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing well. Nothing as exciting as, I would love the chance to get in a rental car and explore some of Southern California. I've been to the Getty Villa, but it's been years, and it's I loved it.
I actually missed you, to be honest.
Did you really?
I did.
Yeah.
I'm being 100% sincere because I thought this is the kind of thing that in the past I've done with Jeff. I've visited these places with someone else.
Yeah.
There's no one there to absorb my absurd asides, my funny comments. There's
Yeah.
it's a one-man show.
So you went to these places by yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, the Getty. I went to the Huntington Library and the museum with Tony and Mindy, who were wonderful traveling companions and hosts. But at the Getty, I was there solo.
Solo. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, but it's not the same.
It
right?
isn't.
Exactly.
So how are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing all right. Before we turned the mics on, I was telling you about how I was getting so sick of the snow days.
Yeah.
Right.
Because then you have to spend time with your family.
I know. And who wants to do that? And no, it's that we just kind of came out of Christmas break, and when it's time to go back in my mind, it's time to go back.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of stop, start, and that can really make me very annoying to everybody else in my household.
Yeah, because at your age, what you want is routine.
Routine.
Yeah.
Exactly. I need it. I crave it. But so this week was snow day free, and so I'm a much happier man this week than I was last week.
How are your classes going this spring?
Great. Fantastic. Yeah. I just kind of
Teaching anything new and unusual?
No. But my film class, I'm always trying to incorporate new films just to keep it interesting for me. So we just watched this week. We watched Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, which I had never seen before, and had learned that there's a lot of Greek mythological undercurrents in that, and Hitchcock liked to use a lot of Greek myth in his as kind of layers to his films, and so that was really, really fun. And so I keep it interesting that way, and I just got approved for next fall a Greek art and archaeology class.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So
fantastic.
I'm really excited about that.
Can I make a suggestion for your film class?
Please.
Okay, so I watched a film recently, not just a movie with explosions and such, but an actual film.
Okay.
The Pod Generation.
The Pod Generation.
Have you seen this?
I have not heard of it.
It's really, really interesting. I watched it on the airplane.
Break it down.
Well, it's a little bit of sci-fi. It's a world in which if a person wants to have a child, they don't have to experience any of it in utero. The child is raised in an external pod shaped like an egg. And it's a really thoughtful, rich drama. You know that my typical song and dance is we got to keep media separate, genres separate. If you want to have entertainment, you watch a movie. If you want to think deeply about something, you read a book.
Yeah.
That's kind of my default.
I gotcha.
Hardly anybody agrees with that. They think I'm crazy. Right.
Yeah.
But this is maybe an exception because it was very thought-provoking, really interesting. And I think it would fit in with some of what you're doing in terms of the birth of Athena from the forehead of Zeus.
Right.
It's kind of like the same thing.
Very interesting. Now, is it a dystopia? It sounds like it could be a dystopia.
I don't want to give anything away.
Oh, all right. Fine.
It definitely has dystopian elements, but it is also subtle and funny.
Funny too.
Yes.
I will keep the Pod Generation. I will write that down. I'll keep that in mind. I'm always looking for. If we do in that class, it's a genre class.
Okay.
And so I'm always looking for something good in science fiction. I think it's one of those genres that I think is very difficult to do well.
Right.
Right. Easy to do badly.
Yes.
But
this is done really well.
I will keep that in mind.
Gattaca is another one, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. Another very, very.
Ethan Hawke.
Yes. That one also in terms of like its themes has aged very well.
Yes. Dystopia. So, speaking of dystopias,
we got to get back to this podcast.
It's time for A History of Education in Antiquity.
Right. We're on part 5 of this
Part
exploration.
5, Marrou 5, as you might say.
Well, that sounds like a band.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is written by what is this guy's name? Henri Irénée Marrou, a Frenchman. 1904 to 1977, a French historian, describes himself as a Christian humanist. His work was primarily in the spheres of late antiquity and the history of education. He's most famous for this work, which thankfully for us was translated into English after its release in French in 1956 by a man named George Lamb and published by Sheed and Ward of New York.
Yeah. And so we're getting back into this after a few weeks away from it. Yeah.
A hiatus.
And I have found this book. I did not know of this book until you called it to my attention. But I found this endlessly fascinating. Right? It's one of these things where in my own education, I've gotten a lot of this stuff like in bits and pieces.
Yes, exactly.
But never really kind of connected this into kind of a coherent whole.
Exactly. That's so well put. It's nice to have these ideas gathered together into one place.
Yeah.
Something else that I like a lot is my early study in the classics was more trees than forest. Right?
Yes.
So in other words, I wanted to be really good at the languages, and that requires a lot of small focus.
Yes.
And I can remember clearly reading Herodotus, Homer, Plato with certain professors, and I would just be really fixed on, is this an optative?
Yeah.
Is this a third plural? Is this a passive? What's going on?
Right.
And, well, I mean, in some sense, that's necessary if you're going to try to learn the material. But there would be occasions where I would have almost no idea what was going on in the actual storyline or text. Yeah. That's not the teacher's fault. It's mine. But now that I'm further along, it's really nice to step back and look at the larger picture questions.
Sure.
Which is what he does.
Exactly. Had a little bit in the myth class that I just came from about an hour ago.
Okay.
We're starting to read the Odyssey. And I put it in the context of the Nostoi, the other return story.
Right.
And my students were really quite surprised that there were all of these other kind of stories about these other heroes trying to get back home and having all this trouble, and to kind of to see the story of Odysseus in that larger context.
Right.
I think is I mean, you don't need it to appreciate the story, but then you see, okay, this is just one part of this much larger, expansive whole. Yeah.
So to make this about me once again.
Yeah, please.
Do you think that that my journey counts as a kind of a nostos? Was I one of the nostos trying to get home?
Oh, absolutely.
When I walked into that food court, looking for something at the M Burger at Midway, it was just like Odyssey Book 9.
It was like, yes.
I'm headed into the cave. Am I going to eat or be eaten?
Exactly. You were like Menelaus and Helen, blown off course for many, many years.
Yeah.
And you come limping back home.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. So why, Jeff, would anyone be interested in Marrou? What's the point of this?
Well, I think that it's. I mean, to reiterate what we were just saying. I mean, he does such a great job of tying all of these things together. So I think he connects a lot of the dots that I think a lot of our listeners have a lot of these dots.
Yes.
And just he draws the lines between them. And then I think he also does a really good job of kind of really spelling out about how a lot of these ideas and these structures that the Greeks had are still with us.
Absolutely.
And the debates about like what makes an education worthy.
What makes it classical?
What makes it classical? What's in and what's out? These are still debates we're having today.
Should it be aristocratic? Should it be democratic?
Should it be practical? Should it focus on the inner life?
Contemplative? Yep. Where's the place for arts?
Yes.
So on and so forth.
Yeah.
So we ourselves were educated and continue to be so, hopefully, cradle to grave.
Yep.
We are educators. There's a resurgence lately in so-called classical education about which there is a great deal of contention and disagreement.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's time to shed some light on this, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So as we get into it, Jeff, what is the subject of Chapter 5 and maybe Chapter 6 if we have time? And how are we going to approach this?
Well, Chapter 5 gets us into the sticky issues of the so-called Sophists.
Ah, yes.
And then Chapter 6, we get into maybe more familiar ground for some of our listeners of Plato.
Yeah.
But even as I was rereading that chapter this morning, it was a lot of that stuff that I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
And it was surprising.
Yeah. So every good author, in my opinion, has a combination of synthesis and analysis going back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. So the analysis is when you take something apart, obviously, and the synthesis is when you put it back together. So Marrou is very good at analyzing some of the fine details, but not spending too much time on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And stepping back and then seeing the forest instead of just the trees, synthesizing and putting it back together.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Totally agreed. Yes. Hey, why don't I do this opening quote before we dive in?
That would be great.
Yeah. So I found this. This is from an article called Plato's School, the Academy by one Matthias Baltes from the journal Hermathena back in 1993. And I just seized upon, there's no deep philosophy here.
Sure.
But I like this as an example of kind of the long shadow that Greek education and Plato's organization of Greek education has had through the centuries. Mm-hmm. So he writes in this article, all the traditional academies of modern times go back ultimately to the model of the Academia Platonica, which Cosimo de' Medici set up in Florence around the year 1460 on the model of the Platonic Academy, or at least that was his intention. In this institution, they're taught distinguished men of that time. For instance, Marsilio Ficino, who through his efforts in particular made available to the West the works of Plato, which had hitherto been generally unknown, and not merely the works of Plato, but also of his later interpreters, the Neoplatonists. On the model of this academy in Florence, there arose in the 16th and 17th century the famed Italian and French academies, and in the 18th, the German and the Irish.
Everyone's getting in on the game.
Yes, right. So that when we often think of the Renaissance, I think many people think of it's the rebirth of the arts.
Yes,
and we think of Michelangelo and
sure.
and Botticelli and like, but
Da Vinci.
But the rediscovery of Greek philosophy.
Absolutely.
And in Florence, as this little snippet says, becomes kind of a recreation of Plato's Academy, and it's just another branch in this tree.
Yeah. So while I was at the Norton Simon Museum there in Los Angeles, I got to see a Botticelli.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, they have one there, the little barrels, and I got to see some Raphael. Phenomenal.
They've got Botticellis and Raphaels there?
They do.
At the Science? What?
No, Norton Simon.
Norton
It's an
Simon.
art
Sorry.
museum.
Sorry, yes.
My speech is probably a little sloppy because I'm on no sleep.
Because you've been sleeping on benches
That's
in
correct.
airports, right?
So I love this quote. Anytime you're mentioning the Medicis, that's good. I like this statement as well. It says it was founded on the model of the Platonic Academy, or at least that was his intention.
Yes.
That's an important point because it seems to me a lot of ink has been spilled, a lot of it wastefully, on the question of authenticity, right? So someone will say, well, Lorenzo the Magnificent or Cosimo, which is his grandfather, I think.
I think so, yeah.
They're not really recreating the Platonic Academy, so it's not a legitimate expression of the same kinds of motives and such that animated Plato. But to my mind, who cares, right?
Right.
Isn't that kind of irrelevant?
Yeah.
Everyone knows that when you imitate something else, it's not going to be a replica.
Yeah.
And it seems worthwhile, if the thing that you're imitating is good, to try to resuscitate it, even with a recognition that it's going to be a very different experience in that time and place.
Yeah. Now, would you say the same kind of thoughts bear upon when we use the term classical education?
Now, that's a great question. I think it depends. It depends upon whether the inability to replicate or imitate the original, if it's an inability dictated by circumstances, or if it's a disregard. Right?
Yeah.
So a classical education, to my mind, is about the study of the ancient Greeks and Romans and the literature that comes from them.
Right.
So I don't think that one has to have the same level of Latinity or skill with Greek in order to count it as a legitimate imitation.
Yeah.
Because, you can't make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Of course.
But to drop it as a goal and to say that trying to be like them in their mastery of the languages is an illegitimate or, less valuable goal, that I can't agree with.
Now you're talking about something completely different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not truly imitation. You're adopting maybe some of the forms, but the motives are completely different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I follow you.
So let's see if we can find an analogy. So here in West Michigan, we have something called broom hockey.
Oh, we do. Yes.
Maybe it's nationwide. I don't know.
I would find that hard to believe
doubt
that this
it.
has swept the nation.
No. Swept the nation.
Oh,
Good one,
man,
Jeff. Yeah.
unintentional. All right.
Okay, so what is broom hockey, Dr. Winkle?
Broom hockey is where it's ostensibly hockey.
Okay.
You're on an ice rink.
Right.
And when I played too, it didn't even involve skates.
No skates. You're just on your boots,
You're just
your
on your
winter
boots.
boots, your moon boots.
But you have a broom or a broom-like implement,
Substance.
right? And then there's a large ball.
About the size of a kickball.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And you're swatting it down towards the
broom.
the short ends with the broom, trying to get into a goal.
Yes.
Right.
So you can only describe it as hockey in the weakest possible sense.
Right. Exactly.
But
So
it exists as a game in its own right.
it does, right? And so I think that, and to some degree, I would be sympathetic to the argument that if you're not in skates, I'm sorry, don't even use the word hockey.
Call it something else.
Call it something else.
Well, some people call it broom ball.
Dude, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually better.
It is. Yeah. So I guess to go back to classics.
Yeah.
Right. Imitation, I think, has to try to imitate the purpose of the activity and the impulse. If it can't be identical in form, if it can't be identical in form, that doesn't mean it's not a good imitation. If it's not interested in being very similar in form,
Right.
then you're talking about a different activity.
Yes, exactly. So when Cosimo
Right.
recreated the academy,
Right.
whether or not it was a perfect imitation, he intended it for it to kind of to have the same ends.
Yes, the goals that Plato had, which
Yes.
is to create an educated, truth-seeking, logic-oriented class of future leaders
Right.
and philosophers.
Exactly.
So it wouldn't be, to my mind, it would not be a good criticism of Cosimo to say, well, you're all Italians. You're not pronouncing Greek the way they did in Athens. Therefore, the whole project is illegitimate. That seems like a quibbling, worthless criticism.
Right. Now, what if you were trying to imitate a certain type of kind of affordable cuisine and you called your place M Burger? Would this
That's a callback.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's leave that alone.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
So that's a quibbling criticism.
Yes.
But if Cosimo had said, we're going to create the Academia Platonica, but we're not going to read any of Plato's works.
Yes.
Well, that seems like it's not an imitation, worth participating in, and doesn't deserve the name.
Right. Then you just be putting the name on the door just to get people in.
Correct.
It's the bait and switch.
It's a veneer.
Yeah.
And is it a patina or a patina? How do you pronounce
I always say
that word?
patina, but I don't know
say
if I'm right.
patina too.
Yeah. Patina?
Yeah. That is, in other words, a thin layer of attractiveness.
Yes.
But that's it.
That's it. Right. Okay.
So it's a great quote.
Yeah.
It's a great quote. So moving on from there,
Right.
we're going to talk about the pedagogical revolution of the early Sophists.
Yes.
So can you set this up for us a little bit, Jeff?
Sure. So in terms of the kind of the chronological context, we're talking about the era kind of right after the Persian Wars, where Athens, kind of after the Persian Wars, but before the war with Sparta.
Right.
Where Athens in particular finds its place in the driver's seat. It's suddenly become very, very powerful and soon to be very, very wealthy.
Yes.
And so it's
Because of their theft from the Delian League.
Exactly. Right? That's right. But because of all these things, they're quickly becoming a center of military, political, and cultural power.
Yeah, the Pentakontiteia, one of my favorite Greek words to say.
That is a good word.
That 50-year period from 479 to the start of the plague.
Yes.
Roughly 50 years,
Right.
429, 430.
And all kinds of incredible things are happening.
Unbelievable.
during this era. And one of them are these sophists, these kind of traveling, wandering teachers for hire that start to kind of ply their wares in Athens and elsewhere and gain followings of students.
So the question is, as we'll see through Marrou, are these individuals legitimate seekers of truth who inaugurated a valuable revolution in education?
Yeah.
Or are they snake oil salesmen?
Right.
Are they selling bottled expertise?
Right.
Take the cap off, pour it around, and you've got what? You've got the appearance of knowledge.
Right.
And that was certainly Plato's take. And so Marrou will say, we'll read the quote in a little bit. This is really the central question. How much of what we know about the Sophists is totally distorted by the Socratics' hyper-conservatism?
Right. Yeah, I think there's something in chapter 6 where Marrou talks about how what happens in the 4th century is you get a kind of organization, maturity, and formalizing of education under people like Plato and Isocrates that is more kind of wild and unbridled in the 5th century. So I like the way he treats the sophists. And when I always hear that term, well, you hear the term today that someone's engaging in sophistry.
It's only ever used in a negative sense.
Exactly right. They're a charlatan.
Right.
And so much, as you were just saying, so much of our picture of these guys comes via Plato. But I think Marrou makes the large point that there was a lot of skepticism about lots of things happening in the 5th century, and the Sophists kind of played this necessary role of asking questions that hadn't been asked, and in some ways tearing a lot of things down for them to be rebuilt later.
Right.
And so, there probably certainly was kind of a significant percentage of people there being clever for the sake of being clever, to make a living doing this. But at the same time, it was an era where there was a kind of freedom to ask and explore these things, probably under the banner of this time of this short time of prosperity.
Yes, and peace.
Yeah.
And to go right along with that, Plato's key distinction through many of his dialogues is that between episteme, which he counts as true knowledge, and techne, which is a skill or a knack or a trick.
Yeah.
And, you can have a techne for, he likes to use common everyday examples, manufacturing shoes, being a baker, being a butcher. You can have a techne of that, but true knowledge requires some deeper understanding of eternal realities.
Right.
And so most of what we know about the Sophists, which is not other than what's in fragments or from Diogenes Laertius or Plutarch, comes to us through Plato, and he is very, very negative on the Sophists. He says, really, they don't have any true knowledge. It's all techne. It's all just a knack.
Yeah. So before we maybe get into exploring some of these figures that are more associated with sophistry, Marrou makes a good point of showing that even in this early time, even in the 6th century, we do see education being organized in various places. He talks
Right.
about there were schools of medicine in Crotone, over in Italy,
Yep.
and in Cyrene. And he also talks about kind of the rise of Pythagoreanism, which also is, Marrou suggests, provides a model for the later Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum.
Right.
And so we do start to see kind of organized education with buildings and rules and set programs for both teachers and students.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love the way the chapter begins. This is page 46. He says, thus Athenians, born in, to begin a chapter with the word thus. Brilliant.
Not bad.
This is one of those rules that I think is totally artificial. Don't begin a sentence with the word and.
Right.
It's fine to learn that when you're a kid, but adults, they do all kinds of things that are unconventional and brilliant, therefore. I'm talking about style, right?
Yeah.
Thus Athenians, born in the decade 490 to 480, men like Pericles and Sophocles and Phidias, who in politics and literature and the arts brought classical culture to such a high level of maturity, these men had only had an elementary education, which as far as actual instruction is concerned, was not much higher than the level of our present-day primary schools.
That's extraordinary.
It is.
Yeah.
So Pericles, the leader of Athens, Sophocles, the great playwright, and Phidias, the sculptor, they had like a fifth-grade education, is what Marrou is saying.
Right.
He ascribes this to the, quote, inevitable time lag between culture and education, a time lag which is often increased by routine, the field of education being a preserve of the conservative outlook.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. That shift reminds me, if I can, if you'll suffer me talking about my film class once again.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So in the class, we do kind of a walkthrough of kind of the history of film and Hollywood going back to the invention of the motion picture camera.
Right.
And I talk about in my class about there were no film schools until the 1960s. And so, directors that Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Coppola, they were all products of these early film schools in New York and LA and such. But before that, if you were were mentioning Hitchcock kind of learned it from the ground up. And he got into advertising and just kind of stumbled his way into the art film. And so until, fairly in terms of the time, like halfway through our history of film, there was no organized education on how to do this. And
very similar thing in the 1980s with the learning of, or late 70s, early 80s, programming personal computers.
Oh, of course, right. Yeah,
the best persons were entirely self-taught. There was no school to go to for most of this.
Exactly. And you need those kinds of brilliant minds to kind of get the ball rolling so that it can turn into something else.
Yeah. So Sophocles had many imitators, but who were far better educated than he was, and also could draw upon Sophoclean drama as inspiration.
Right.
But he, as the original, is really unequaled.
Yes.
On page 48, I like what Marrou says as well here. He says, every historian of philosophy or the exact sciences feels bound to devote a chapter to the Sophists. Right? If you're going to talk about philosophy or the exact sciences, physics, such, it is a chapter that is extremely difficult to write and rarely satisfactory. Another good move for an author, right? Lowering the expectations of the audience.
Right.
Because that's what he proceeds to do. He proceeds to talk about the Sophists. Just one more quote. He says, Plato's treatment of the Sophists was always highly ambiguous, and it has never been easy to grasp where invention and caricature and calumny begin and where they end. There is the further possibility that Plato's representation of the conflict between Socrates and the Sophists was really a camouflaged form of his own struggle against his contemporaries. People like Antisthenes, who was an orator in particular. So what he's saying is, we don't know just how reliable the portrait that Plato paints, how reliable it is, and how much of this was just his own inside baseball.
Right.
He was aggrieved against these individuals. He was in competition with them.
Right. I think in this same chapter, Marrou points out that there does seem to be, even amongst the Sophists, a groundswell of argument that we have this new form of democracy,
right?
And so we need to come up with a way to produce people who will do this well.
Yeah,
I think an idea that Plato was no fan of democracy,
no,
but he was all in his own philosophy. He was very interested in in providing education so that people could become leaders.
Right.
But
he is interested in good government.
Good government, right? Just not democracy.
Right. He doesn't want the polis, governed by just anyone who's going to ruin things.
Right. And so Marrou makes the argument that surely that there was a large part of sophistry happening that was interested in meeting the demands of the time and not just simply being clever for cleverness' sake.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that there's a definite turn from, the apex of the expression of one's arete. It's no longer athletics or polite society.
Right.
It's now, how are you going to govern and lead your fellows, your citizens? How are you going to govern them to some good end?
Exactly.
Because of men like Themistocles and Pericles. I want to be like one of them. Look at what they did, right? They saved our city. They saved our bacon from the Persians. Mm-hmm. We need more people like that. Right. Can they be produced?
Right, exactly. While also keeping in mind that they were also, Themistocles up for ostracism.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So, imitate them, but also, I don't know when to...
Get rid of them?
Right, know when to get rid of them.
Yeah,
right.
One of the very endearing aspects of Athenian political culture.
Indeed, yeah.
So the Sophists, right, they introduce a new type of education, seemingly inspired by Pythagoras and Pythagorism. Mm-hmm. Did we do an episode on that?
We did talk about the Pythagoreans, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Vegetarianism.
Right. Vegetarians, right. They
Don't blame us, or what is it? No meat for us, we're Pythagoreans.
That's right, exactly.
It was inspired by Ovid, book 15.
Yeah. Right. So that was, the Pythagoreans, they had, it was education, but with a side dish of oddities.
Of craziness.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
Quasi-religion and dietary needs.
Don't poke beans. Don't poke a fire. Don't eat beans.
Don't eat beans.
Don't jump over an iron bar.
That's right. That's right.
All kinds of unusual things, which, those kinds of caricatures could be the parodies of comedians. We don't really know.
Indeed. Right. So, hey, you want to talk about the clouds? As a
because I traveled through them recently.
Well, I mean, you can bring that into this if you want.
It was just thick fog all around the airplane. It was like a pea soup that we were traveling. There were bits of bacon on the wings.
Oh, that's never good.
Yeah, onions hanging from the landing gear.
Man. No, I was talking about Aristophanes.
Okay.
Yes. And one of my favorite comedies, but he's definitely but it's a weird mixed bag. He's taking aim at the Sophists.
Yes.
But in that play, the worst of the Sophists is Socrates himself.
Right.
And so it really kind of, it muddies the waters. It's like,
sure.
Well, to what degree do we take this at face value? Is it all just kind of pure flip-flop satire?
I think it is that. I think it's flip-flop satire. And my reason for thinking that is that Plato discusses it in the Apology, right? Socrates says, look, you're confusing me with other people. I never said I can make the weaker argument stronger. I don't talk about meteorology. You're thinking maybe of other people that, talk about the things in the heavens, ta meteora, and the movements of heavenly bodies. And you've really gotten just a bad caricature from a comic writer.
Right.
And he's referring there to the clouds, the frontisterion, the thinkery shop.
Right.
And so I think he also tries to salvage Aristophanes' reputation in the Symposium, right? On which we will do at least a couple episodes at some point.
We need to, yes.
And so there, Aristophanes and Socrates are buddies, right? They're speaking the same language.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting about how that, I mean, this is a side note, but it speaks to the power of popular culture to shape a public view, right? It reminds me of...
You going to talk about your film class
No,
again?
I won't. But it reminds me of like an actor who finds himself typecast as a particular, like a heavy in a gangster film.
Sure.
And then when people meet them in real life, they...
expect them to be cruel.
Right. And so if the person's like really friendly, they're kind of surprised that they're not their character. And so Socrates seems to be saying that most of you know me because you saw this character in this play.
Yeah.
And that's not who I am.
Another example would be when a comedian does an impersonation of a public figure. Mm-hmm. Eventually, the impersonation and its absurdities is so powerful that you start to forget the real person. Right?
Yes.
When Dana Carvey used to do impersonations of George Bush or Fred Armisen of Barack Obama, I primarily think about those public characters now through the medium of the impersonation.
Totally.
Because they're so expert.
Totally, yeah. I remember arguments that in the the 92 election.
Yeah.
That George Bush becoming a one-termer.
That's George H.W. Bush.
Yes,
right.
the first George Bush. Lost in part to the fact that his whole persona became Dana Carvey's ridiculous.
Right.
Not gonna do it.
Right.
That guy. I mean, I would never say, oh yes, that's the reason why, but it's a part of the thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Aristophanes, to summarize, very powerfully shaped public opinion about Socrates.
Yes.
It seems. But the reason that I think it's just satire is that both of those individuals are known as arch-conservatives.
Yes.
Aristophanes is the most conservative, probably, of ancient authors, while being at the same time the most, what's the word? Colorful, working blue all the time.
Right, which is not things I think today that people would necessarily put together. Right?
They don't associate
say,
those things.
How could those two things go together? But yeah, Aristophanes in terms of his plays, he's constantly pushing the envelope.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of pushing envelopes,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
Let's do it.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Jeff, tell me a few things about Ratio.
Well, I love my Ratio 8.
Okay.
I used it this morning as I use it every morning. I woke up.
So did I.
I woke up. I got I got the metal cone.
Yes.
I filled it with my favorite grounds. I put it kind of right under the pour over the bubbler, the metallic veins.
Are you talking about the Fibonacci head?
That's what I'm trying to say. Yes. And then I hit the button. And I go sit.
Then you had to watch it carefully and fine tune it and direct it to try to get a good cup of coffee.
Of course not. It does its own thing. It is.
Yeah.
Its genius is in its simplicity.
Yes.
And it goes through those. It goes through those three stages. You got the bloom stage, where you have the off gassing of all the nasty CO2. Then you got the brew stage, where you the hot water comes out of those metallic veins in the Fibonacci head, and then it's ready.
Yep.
That's all there is to it.
So would you say it's as easy as coffee you might make in a Dak and Blecker?
Much easier.
What about Senior Coffee?
Senior, no, there's no comparison.
Okay.
Neither of those.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I've had those kinds of machines, and
Right.
they usually find their way into the recycle bin.
Yeah.
Not long after I get them.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Right? So I've had the Ratio 8 for a long time now, and it's going to be around for a long time.
I think this will be my 4th year
That's fantastic.
for Ratio 8.
Right.
I was traveling recently, drank a lot of coffee, some of it pretty good at people's homes, a lot of it very bad elsewhere, let me say.
Yes.
I was even introduced to gas station coffee at one point.
Out of necessity?
Yes, out of necessity.
Oh, man.
I needed the warmth. I needed the caffeine.
Right.
Terrible.
Right.
I was very happy to come back to my family and to my coffee machine.
Absolutely. It does. It does, as we've said many times, having a Ratio will ruin you for getting coffee elsewhere.
Yeah.
You do it at home, and it's perfect.
What about those Gurek machines with their little marsupods, the single serve things?
No, I have no time for those.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Dak and Blecker, Senior Coffee, marsupods,
Bar Stucks.
Bar Stucks. You're wasting your time.
Exactly.
Right.
So let's say that the listener is convinced they want good coffee. What should they do, Jeff?
Well, they should go to ratiocoffee.com. Check out what they've got on tap. You can get the Ratio 8, which is kind of their premier machine. You can get its younger brother, the Ratio 6, which I had for a while. It was great.
Excellent, right?
Yeah, and then coming soon, the Ratio 4.
Yes, very soon, sometime this spring.
Fantastic.
While I was in my hotel,
Yes.
right, they have those little plastic trays with a, kind of a coffee tea bag sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just thinking, in a better world, this would be a Ratio 4.
Absolutely.
Single serve, but the same high quality. So that's what people have to look forward to. So go to ratiocoffee.com,
Yep.
check out their offerings, and I think we have a coupon code, do we not, Jeff?
Yes. For January, it is ANCO 5K.
ANCO5K. What does the K stand for?
Boy, man, case a tough one. Let's see.
Kaleidoscope.
That's what it is.
It's a kaleidoscope of flavors, all of which are wonderfully expressed because of the off-gassing
Yes.
in the Ratio 8, 6, and 4.
Nice save. So put in that coupon code, and that will get you 15% off your entire order.
Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Hackett Publishing. The good people at Hackett Publishing have been in business for nigh unto 53 years with their offices in Indianapolis and Cambridge. They have been keeping the flame alive.
Now, wait a minute, Jeff.
Yes.
Are you sure it's Hackett Publishing, and are you not confusing them with Smackett Publishing?
Smackett Publishing. Well, tell me about Smackett
Well, they publish
Publishing.
books mainly on hitting.
Really? That seems like a very niche audience.
It is pretty niche.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm talking about Hackett
Okay.
Publishing, right. You know these guys. They've got that artwork that I love so much.
That you've talked about just a little bit.
There's just a little bit. They're affordable. They have translations, sometimes multiple translations of the same work.
By all excellent translators.
All excellent translators.
Stanley Lombardo.
Right.
Ambrose.
Yep. And
Deborah Roberts.
Yes, we've used all of these, the ones you've named on the show. And my students love them because they are, it does not drain your pocketbook. And so when you order from Hackett, you know you're getting something high quality and it's not going to kill your budget.
That's right. And a wide variety from which to choose.
Yes. So it's not just the classics.
Right.
Yep.
And they are supporting this podcast.
Right. And have been since almost the very beginning.
We're going on 4 years.
Yep.
We said, would you like to support this little endeavor? And they said, that little endeavor? Sure, we're behind it.
No problem.
Took a chance on a couple of... Knuckleheads? Yeah, there you go.
So, listeners, Dave and I encourage you, check out hackettpublishing.com. That's HACKETT publishing.com. And you will see their massive inventory of academic books from across the scope of academia. They've got Islamic studies, they've got philosophy, they've got
East Asian
studies, as well as all kinds of wonderful translations from the classical world.
Yes, and we know that many of you have been patronizing them and supporting them, and we're very grateful for that as well.
Yep.
Thank you so much. We hear from many listeners who say, I'm buying stuff from Hackett, I'm enjoying it. Thanks for the discount. We're really grateful to you.
Yes.
So if you want to check it out, go to hackettpublishing.com. That's not smack it.
Nope.
HACKETT. See what they have. Make some selections. Put it in your little grocery basket. And then at checkout, what do, Jeff?
They type in the code AN2024.
2024. Brand new year, brand new bargains.
Yep. And the same great discount applies. That's 20% off your entire order and free shipping.
That's incredible.
Check it out.
All right, Jeff, as we get back into it now after the break, where are we headed?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit more specifically about what some of the Sophists were doing that we know about. Again, with the caveat that we have to try to cut through that Platonic fog of satire, perhaps. But we know that like a notable sophist like Protagoras.
Yes.
He was known to take kind of young men under his wing for up to 3 years I guess in a kind of, what would you call it, an apprenticeship or
kind of,
or it was
franchise,
right? Or was it just kind of wealthy young men who are idle or
I don't know,
were able to do this for a time?
Let me read a little bit from Marrou here, page
please.
49. Protagoras was the first to offer to teach for money in this way. There had been no similar system before. The result was that the Sophists did not find any customers waiting for them, but had to go out and persuade the public to take advantage of their services. Hence arose a whole publicity system. The Sophist went from town to town in search of pupils, taking those he had already managed to catch with him. To make himself known, to demonstrate the excellence of his teaching, and to give a sample of his skill, he would give a sample lecture, what is called an epideixis, a demonstration, either in a town through which he happened to be passing, or in some pan-Hellenic sanctuary like Olympus, where he could take advantage of the Protagoras, the international assembly that gathered there for the games. So it seems to me like it's sort of like being a tennis pro or a golf pro, right? Every big successful health club has one individual on retainer,
yes,
who's a specialist in this particular field, right?
Right.
And their job is to coach and teach others how to be like them.
Yes.
Never with the understanding that you're going to become a professional yourself, because I think that training is more specialized, but with the idea of helping you learn how to enjoy the game more fully.
Right. Well, kind of the added element, which I find so interesting, is that Protagoras would take this on the road.
Yep.
And he would go to places where there were already large crowds. Right. And so,
like the snake oil salesman,
exactly,
the traveling apothecarist.
Right. You set up your tent and you start yelling, "Gather round!" and then you kind of show off what you can do. Right?
Hopefully, you have a little monkey on a leash, right? And you're cranking one of those things,
the
monkey grinder, the organ grinder.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It also reminded me too is, I think I see an element of this kind of thing that that comes across my social media as you've seen like these master classes.
Oh yeah.
And so you can watch a minute and a half trailer.
Some fairly famous people.
Yes, and you can do a master class in acting, in
Right.
painting, or music recording, and
It's very similar.
and so again, these are these kind of our modern day sophists. Like for a fee, I will let you know my secrets.
So on page 50, Marrou says that this phenomenon gave rise to the public lecture, a literary form which ever since those earliest days has been quite astonishingly popular.
Yes, indeed.
So that's the birth of the notion of the traveling lecturer.
Traveling lecturer,
Who's
right?
I guess would be kind of like the stand-up comedian. People don't come into town now and lecture on, very often, abstruse topics like physics and so forth.
Yeah.
Not in a public setting. That's usually restricted to the classroom.
Right.
But this is what they were doing in the past. He says, quote, some of these lectures were open to anybody. Hippias, haranguing the crowd in the Agora with the money changers table quite close by, reminds one of the speakers in Hyde Park. A London reference, right?
Yeah.
Others were for a select audience only and had to be paid for, even at this early stage. It reminds me of Patreon. Are you familiar with that kind of model?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You can be different levels of commitment. I have one for Latin per diem. But
Yeah.
anyway, some stuff is freely available to everybody.
Right.
But if you really want to get the best stuff, you have to be an initiate, and that comes with a fee.
Right. Exactly.
This is what the Sophists were doing.
Yeah. I think the next question to explore then, okay, that's what they were doing, but
Okay.
what exactly were the students getting out of this, and what exactly were they teaching?
Well, one thing they were teaching was the art of politics.
Okay. So what do you mean by that?
Well, let me quote from Marrou, again, page 50, because he gives an excellent answer.
Okay.
We must now consider the content of this teaching. Its aim was to arm the strong character, to prepare him for political strife so that he would succeed in imposing his will on the city. This was apparently Protagoras' intention in particular. He wanted his pupils to be made into good citizens who could not only rule their own homes properly, but also conduct affairs of state with the utmost efficiency. His aim was to teach them the art of politics, πολιτικη, τέχνη.
Okay. All right.
Political skill, the kind of particular craft that you need within the polis.
Right. Now, the way that Marrou describes it there, that doesn't sound like a huckster. That
No.
sounds like somebody doing something fairly worthwhile.
So why would Plato find fault with it?
Well, that's a good question.
Can we think of a contemporary analog? I was thinking of lobbyists, but lobbyists are not really trying to teach anyone how to govern the state. They're more just trying to satisfy a particular interest.
Right.
Most politicians come from law school,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there are some businessmen and women who go on to politics, but it seems like if you want to be a public figure, law school is in some ways the best training. That's what they say.
Right.
I used to think that law school was like being in Plato's Republic, the dialogue. It's about discussing the nature of the good and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then I met some people who had actually been through law school, and they said, it's not like that at all.
How do they describe it?
It's just like a vocational school. It's
Okay.
learning how to, to work on cars. It's learning how to program. It's highly technical and really specific.
Gotcha.
It's not about big ideas. It's about fulfilling minor functions.
Okay. All right. So so you would say that like a guy like Protagoras so where would he fall kind of between those two poles?
Tech school.
Tech school? Okay.
I mean, this is Plato's constant criticism.
Right.
You're not really teaching people how to become better persons, if that's even possible, which Plato doesn't believe.
Right.
You're just teaching them really a sophisticated art of manipulation.
Yes. Yeah.
How to get from your fellows what you want.
Right. One of the things I got from Marrou that he suggests that guys like Protagoras or the Sophists were, in many ways, kind of pushing back against the pre-Socratics in a lot of their musings about what is the nature of the world? Can we reduce it to these core elements?
Right. Is it mind? Is it
yes.
Water? Is it air?
Fire? Right. And Protagoras says all that stuff just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is the here and now. And if you're going to learn something, learn some kind of practical skill to win right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this is borne out by page 51, Marrou.
Okay.
He says, this education developed in the direction of a relativistic humanism. So not the good kind of humanism, which is, like Terence. Mm-hmm. Everything, I'm a human, nothing human do I consider foreign to me.
Right.
But a relativistic humanism. So this seems to be expressed, to continue the Marrou quote, in one of the few genuine fragments that have come down to us from Protagoras, the famous formula, man is the measure of all things.
Right.
A great deal of mischief has been done by trying to give this a metaphysical significance, turning its author into the fountainhead of phenomenalist empiricism, a forerunner of modern subjectivism, which is the idea that The subject alone is responsible for all meaning that exists.
Right.
Similarly, on the strength of the few echoes that have come down to us from the treatise On Not Being by Gorgias, it has been suggested that Gorgias was a philosophical nihilist. This is a gross exaggeration, says Marrou, of the meaning of the passages concerned, which were intended to be taken at their face value. Neither Protagoras nor Gorgias had any intention of creating a system. Both were simply concerned to formulate a number of practical rules. They never taught their pupils any truths about being or man, but merely how to be always and in any kind of circumstances right.
Right. Okay. Yes. That's very well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah. So I think it brings us around to, I think this question that our culture is still trying to come around to, that what is the primary aim of education?
Yeah.
Right? Is it as maybe a Protagoras here would say, it should be purely a practical one.
Yes.
You learn the techne because you need the techne to deal with what's in front of you right now.
Correct. This is one of the ways that many people avoid the question of the ends or the goals or purposes of education. They just rule it out of order. They say it's an irrelevant question and we need to focus on the means. And Plato would say that's entirely incoherent.
Right.
Right. Until you know your destination, you can't use the map.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But what do you think?
Well, it reminds me of when students come to me for advice about majors and minors.
What should I major in? That kind of thing.
Right. And so it often comes. These are students who will take a myth class or something along those lines, and they love it. And the question is kind of born out of, I love this, but I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
And certainly, having, taught at a more traditional four-year university and now teaching at a community college, I've been presented with, kind of an ethos of education, one that was, at least on paper, was kind of more lofty, and it's about educating the whole person, and it shouldn't really be about you getting a job.
Yeah.
And then at community college, where most students come in and their aim is often very practical. Like, I want to do this because I want this very specific job at the end of this. And so, I wrestle with that. And so, my advice to students often is along the lines of, if you have it within your time and your budget, balance, have a practical major with a major that's kind of more, I'm going into radiology, but if you can minor in philosophy, or
music, film,
exactly, and find some
ceramics, and
kind of think of it educate the whole person, but also I think a more Protagorean approach is that you have to deal with the world with you in some sense as it is, right? And so it's all well and good to kind of adhere to kind of the lofty that education should be about forming the moral inner person. You have to kind of recognize of these externalities as well. So, I mean, how do you think about that question?
In a very similar way.
Okay.
And I think that the truth is that most of this is introduced by the question of money, right? So I am myself of a free market orientation. I'm very much in favor of a free market, but it doesn't follow from that a free market will necessarily value good things in each and every case.
Right.
Some things are really valuable and have no monetary value that you can assign to them. They don't have a market value.
Yeah.
Philosophy is one of these things, literature. So, when someone's listening to one of their favorite songs, reading a book, watching a movie, they don't come to you and say, now what am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
Because what it's supposed to do has already been accomplished. Enjoyment.
Yes.
Relaxation, peace, the stimulation of the imagination.
Yeah.
But if they have to pay for a very expensive education, then the question naturally arises, what am I going to do with this?
Sure.
Right? You don't have to say, the cost of going for a walk is pretty much nothing. You just go take the walk. The cost of buying a fancy luxury vehicle is very high, even though they're both modes of transportation.
Yes.
So before I buy a very expensive vehicle, I feel like I need to have some justification for it because there's a huge cost.
Right.
And I think this is why Plato says you shouldn't charge for education. He would only take money from students if after they were finished with their education, they voluntarily bestowed it upon him as a gift.
Yeah.
If you charge up front, there's something artificial about it that ruins the system of education. Now, both of us as educators, right? I think we like the credit and trust placed in us that we're going to deliver a good product.
Yeah.
And so I like that system, but inevitably it skews the activity to where students have to ask the question,
Yes.
what am I going to do with it?
Right. Yeah, that's very. I think you put that very, very well, and I think that it's the heart of like when I wrestle with trying to find ways for my students to balance what they're passionate about,
Right.
and but also kind of the practical needs of having to pay rent, at the same time. And
I think it's kind of irresponsible. What I have heard some people say, people like us who have advanced degrees in the humanities and a lot of love, I think for them, I think it's kind of irresponsible to say, you shouldn't ask that question. Just study philosophy, just study music. You're selfish, they would say. I've heard people say this. You're very selfish to wonder what's the practical benefit. I don't think that's a selfish question.
No.
I think it's an inevitable consequence of the cost involved in the activity.
Right, exactly.
The lower the cost, the less pressure there is, to get something out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of, we've talked about Joseph Campbell on the show. And one of his famous quotes is when he was asked by students, like, what should I do with my life? And his famous quote was just simply, follow your bliss. And
I don't like that slogan.
I don't like that. I don't like that either. But I mean, I think a lot of students are attracted to kind of the romanticism of
Sure.
it. And his idea was that, if you simply follow your bliss, the universe will take you where you need to go.
Nah.
Right? So
another way to look at this is this question in the past was solved very easily by the understanding that not everyone should seek certain types of education.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be practical if you're not compelled to study it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean the world has changed so much in that in some ways to reach the upper echelons of any part of the economy, you almost have to have some sort of degree as your entry ticket. And so that implies that the college is for everybody,
right?
And then add to that just the cost of tuition, outpacing wages
and inflation,
exactly,
by something like 400%.
Right. It's reaching. It seems to be kind of
Are we getting a little preachy? Because
Well,
if so, I'm totally happy with that.
I'm not getting preachy, but I mean,
it's a recipe for disaster.
People have been talking about for years about that we seem to be reaching a breaking point, or the bubble's going to pop,
right?
And it's hard not to feel like that's on the horizon.
Well, in some ways, I think the Sophists solved this, although their solution is not one that, as someone highly sympathetic to Plato, their solution is not one that I can accept. Right? They partly solved it by saying, we're just going to teach you how to succeed in politics. We're not going to teach you morality per se. Right? There's something almost Machiavellian about it.
Yeah.
Plato's objection was, you can't ultimately divide those things. You have to keep them together.
Yeah.
The quality of the soul and the quality of human life is inseparable from the art of politics.
Right.
Whereas the Sophists said, well, we'll just divide them up.
Right.
In the modern context, if someone wants to be a lawyer, a doctor, do they have to have a liberal arts training?
Right.
I would say no. Mm-hmm. But if they're going to have one, it has to be more than just a veneer, that's kind of sprayed over strong technical knowledge. Yes.
Would you say that...
you don't spray on veneer, by the way. Sorry.
Would you say that in the best of its intentions, something like the more recent moves towards classical education, however, whatever that means, is a response to this notion that the idea of an American education is becoming much more is too vocational.
Yes, entirely pragmatic, right? It all starts with Alexis de Tocqueville in the 19th century. He said the American people is the most pragmatic people you'll ever meet. He knew this. It's going on 200 years ago now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we should push back against pragmatism in some sense as the be all and end all of our existence. It's not right. But some of the solutions, they don't really address the problem of pragmatism. So one of the ways is, well, everyone needs to have a practical education, but then they'll just take a sampling of liberal arts. And that doesn't really serve either goal.
Yeah.
It'd be better just to divide them up, I think.
Right.
So you can become a dentist, but then you can take a year off and get some real mastery of the Western corpus, for example.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. This, in some ways, so these arguments, these
Perennial.
tensions, they've never changed.
Yeah.
Right. They're still there. And so, the vita activa versus the vita contemplativa, right? The practical, the active life versus the contemplative life.
Yep. And we haven't even touched on dialectics and rhetoric,
Right.
which became an overwhelming part of the curriculum.
It did.
Because if you're going to be able to teach people the art of politics, it's primarily about public speaking.
Yes.
Have you followed any of the recent Iowa caucui, the caucuses, and the New Hampshire primary and so forth?
I just in the kind of the headlines that pop up in my feed, but election years always make me queasy.
Very queasy.
Since I try to stay away from it until it's completely unavoidable. Right?
Yes. One conclusion you can draw is that there aren't soaring heights of rhetoric much anymore.
Right.
But I'm not sure that's all bad, because I think rhetoric, this is a Platonic idea, is probably more often used to harm people than to help them. Mm-hmm. So I don't really bemoan the lack of eloquence among politicians.
Wouldn't you say also that, since the invention of the television, politics has become much more image-driven than it is?
Well, that's what they say.
Yeah.
The famous Chequers speech of, not the Chequers speech, but the previous one with Nixon versus Kennedy.
Kennedy, yeah.
Kennedy won because he's photogenic.
Right. And
Nixon was sweating bullets.
Yeah, right.
But on the substance, who knows who's the winner?
Right. All right, Dave, we're up against it, so we got to get out of here.
Is someone trying to use the vomitorium?
Well, I did hear some banging on the doors upstairs. You have any idea who that crowd is out there?
It sounds like it might be the Society for the Undoing of Limerick Knavery.
Oh, those guys sulk.
Yes.
That's an ornery bunch.
They've heard the limericks you've been reading on the air, and they are outraged.
Wait, they're upset about my limerick?
Yes.
That they like yours? Is that?
Of course.
Oh, God, man. Okay,
You've read none. So.
All right. Okay, well, I'm getting sweaty thinking about running that gauntlet, so let's wrap this up.
But before we get out of here, you need to talk about the Moss method.
No, I believe you need to
talk
is it
about,
me? Yes, you're the one who
sorry.
Yeah.
One of us needs to talk about the Moss method.
Would you please tell us about the Moss method?
It's a way to learn Greek. Go to mossmethod.com. Check out the program. It is affordable, self-paced, and expert. It'll take you from...
neophyte to erudite, I believe.
That's correct. Thank you very much. What's your favorite feature, Jeff?
I love the office hours, where you get these people from all around the world at a designated time. They get to interact with you.
That's right.
No flunky, no underling.
That's right.
Direct access to the boss. That's my favorite part.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that there may be better Greek programs out there. I can't say with any kind of certainty, but I'm really confident there's not a better value. The combination of affordability, direct access, and the quality, comprehensiveness. I've been teaching and studying Greek for a long, long time. More than 3 decades, and I've distilled all that knowledge down into this course.
Excellent. So if people go to mossmethod.com, they can sample some of the free
yes,
the free
many,
videos?
many.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So yes, check that out. Now, what about LLPSI?
Yeah, so that stands for Lingua Latina Per Se Illustrata, the program I've developed for teaching yourself Latin with my guidance and help. latinperdiem.com/LLPSI. The first unit features chapters 1 through 9 of Hans Orberg's famous book, The Familia Romana. I'm teaching 4 students in the studio, and you can learn from their successes. You can learn from their mistakes. It's, again, a very affordable and expert program.
Excellent. So, and where do they find that? What's the...
latinperdiem.com/LLPSI, and more than 2,000 free instructional videos. If you don't want to pay for the course, that's fine. I give a lot of my knowledge away. Kind of like Plato instead of Protagoras.
Yeah, way to tie that back.
Thanks. So please check that out.
All right. As always, we have people to thank. Mishka, our wonderful engineer, who turns this around, makes us sound way better than we actually are. We got Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin that provide that screaming guitar, that wonderful music you hear throughout the podcast.
The bumper music, the intro, the outro. Scott with those blazing arpeggios.
Incredible. Yep. And hey, check out our website, adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V there. You can pick something up from the store. These wonderful Quai Docent t-shirts.
That's correct.
The black and the orange.
Yes, kind of an attic vase theme.
Yes, exactly.
You can send an email to Jeff. You can say, Jeff, that was a great show. How do you put up with that other guy?
Right.
And that would be jeff@adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. You can ask him questions about pop culture. He is Johnny Pop after all.
That's right. And if you got questions for Dave, suggestions for episodes, complaints, please write to Dave at dave@adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V.
And Jeff, what are we doing next week?
I think we're doing an interview. Right?
Yes, we are.
What's this all about?
So this is with Steve Maiulo and Ann Larson, who are our colleagues over at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And they're going to talk to us about the Renaissance Athena, a woman from the Netherlands, Anna Maria van Schoorman, who was just a brilliant philologist and a very important scholar. And they are experts on this particular woman, and they're going to be on the air, this particular scholar, and talking to us about that.
Fantastic. This is something that I know nothing about. I'm looking forward to learning all about this. This sounds very cool.
Yes.
Yep.
And Jeff, I believe you have the gustatory parting shot.
I do. This is a modern Greek proverb, which goes like this. Life is a cucumber. Either you eat it and are refreshed, or you eat it and struggle. So as I understand, this is supposed to be like if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So
It's a cucumber. You eat it and are refreshed.
or you eat it and you struggle.
Have you ever struggled through a cucumber?
I enjoy cucumbers.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it as a struggle.
A little bit of vinegar, a little bit of salt and pepper.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. Great stuff.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.